Today we'll talk about deities. Deities, which stand for form, the form of divinity. Christ on a cross, the idea of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, the idea of the sacrament, the idea of holy blood, holy body. All these are deity ideas, ideas based on form of divinity. Divinity which has form, substance, materiality, materialism. On the other hand, of course, we have the absolute deity, which we cannot call a deity, but which we can call an absolute formless divinity, a divinity without form. That is similar to the Islamic belief of the formless deity, and why a lot of Islam believes that the deity should never be given form, and any such move would be heretical to their belief. This is why, of course, some groups, especially some extremist groups, maybe engage in destruction of deity-based structures, whether it is a Buddha of Bamiyan or even the crypts of the old Islamic theoretical preachers, the mausoleums which are destroyed, because those too, if they're worshipped by others, those too become heretical in nature to those who believe that divinity should not have form. Now, what we are going to concentrate on regarding the form and formlessness of divinity is our own form and formlessness. As far as Oriental theology is concerned, there is no religion. There is only forms of spirituality and ways of life. There is no religion. This is very important for us to understand this idea, firstly. What is the difference between what we can call a religion and what we can call a way of life or spirituality? A religion has an outsider and an insider. A spirituality believes in an external world and an internal world. These are two very different things. So, for example, in religion, there will be prescribed the believer and what the believer stands for, and the infidel, the one who is not a believer. The religion presupposes that believers are good and non-believers are bad. Therefore, the believers have upon themselves the duty to see to it that the non-believers become good or dead, which is a lesser form of good as far as the religion is concerned. There are two things here. One, that the religion is exclusive, non-inclusive of other people's beliefs and ideas, and is therefore anti-life. Anything which refuses to include other life forms must be considered anti-life. Anything, any idea, any practice, any tool that wishes to homogenize life which has no homogeneity and whose very essence is to be heterogeneous, any such homogenizing tool must be seen as anti-life, especially when such religion or system talks about converting or killing those who don't believe in such a religion. Then the system must certainly be seen as anti-life and perhaps genocidal in its very intentions. Genocide is then caused not as unintended consequences, but as the very basis, forms the very basis of the intention of such a system, which is anti-life. Ultimately, such a system will be auto-destructive in nature. If the whole world is turned to this so-called one religion, there will be groups within this religion which will consider themselves to be the true followers of this religion, and they will say that the others are pretenders and they need to be converted or once again killed until they become true believers, which is what is happening a lot in the Middle East between the Shias and the Sunnis and between the Sunnis themselves. This, of course, used to also happen between the Protestants and the Catholics. Everybody knows of the assassination attempts on Queen Elizabeth by the Roman Church. And it doesn't stop there. The medieval inquisitions, the torture of entire countries and peoples, conducted under the auspices of the Church, was to weed out the secret pretenders, the secret non-believers from the true believers. Therefore, we must agree that such systems must be seen in their practice, not in their theory, but in their practice, as anti-human. Now we come to the question of spirituality. Spirituality talks about an external world and an internal world. An external world which is cognized by the five senses, experienced through the mind, and the internal world which is beyond the cognitive capacity of the five senses. The internal world is seen as the foundational world of experience. This world is immortal. The world outside, made up of the elements and compounds, and which is perceivable, cognizable by the five senses, is the mortal world, world of form, body, and so on. Now, deities exist in the world of form. They do not exist in the world of formlessness. So deities exist in the external world and not in the internal world. There is in each object of the external world limitations, whether the object is a star, a planet, a black hole, a solar system, a human being, a rose plant, a dog, a stone, or whatever. Every object has limitations. So deities also have limitations. This is something very important for us to understand. When a consciousness is incapable of penetrating the internal world and is capable only of living and experiencing the external world, then for such a consciousness is given the practice and belief in deities. Deities being seen as the controllers of the external world. Now, when we say controllers, we do not mean that they control our destiny or our fate, because destiny and fate is born through cause and effect. And in this, there is a certain amount of free will within our capacities, limitations, understanding, and so on. So we can understand then that different people have different levels of what we call free will. Now, a deity has a very expanded sense of free will compared to a human being. We see capacities based on 3 levels: the capacity to know something, the capacity to do something, and the capacity to will or desire something. A deity has a highly expanded version of these 3 faculties. Their ability to know, do, and will be far beyond the capacities of even our intellectual imagination, because they do not exist on the intellectual plane, they exist on the intuitive and post-intuitive planes. Living on these planes and having the almost infinite capacities across these 3 levels that we talked about, the deity is something that can be concentrated upon by a consciousness, by human consciousness who wants to evolve or gain the protection of such a higher consciousness. It is simply one consciousness trying to communicate with another consciousness. That is all, and there is nothing more than this. Now, the form of communication can be as a union, which is yoga, where the lower consciousness is trying to fuse with the higher consciousness, or it can be in the form of supplication and requests, in the form of prayer, in the form of asking for security, asking for creativity, asking for individual skills and talents, and so on. It is just like hooking up your brain to a larger brain, and there is nothing beyond that. Now, this is as concerns deity with form. In deity with form, there are rules and regulations. Just like when we speak to another human being, there are certain ways that we should be if we want to communicate properly with that person. In a similar way, there are certain ways of being if we want to communicate with certain deities. Deities are energy forms. Consciousness is energy. Being higher consciousness forms, but without the kind of bodies that we assume, they are also energy forms. In order to communicate with a certain energy form, we have to synchronize ourselves with its energy. The intensity of our energy might be far less than the intensity of the energy we wish to communicate with. That is fine. But we need to be synchronous with that energy. At that time, a harmonic resonance takes place between our consciousness and theirs. That is what we call the process of laya in yoga. Dissolution into another consciousness, into a higher consciousness. A process of self-willed evolution. So, while following this process with any deity, there are ways of being, ways of synchronizing our energies with the energy of the deity being. We should therefore choose those energy forms which are closest to our own synchronicity level, to our own type of wave energy, to our own type of consciousness and way of being. If we do this, it will be easier for us to synchronize with such a higher deity. This is why some deities are supplicated only by women, some only by men, some only by people of a certain mindset, and so on, because they all have different energy forms, and whichever energy form comes closest to them well, it's easiest for that energy form to resonate with them and to harmonize with them. Whereas other energy forms which are far away would find it hard to harmonize with a deity energy which is not harmonized or which is not similar to its own waveform. This is the process of Tantra, where the Guru gives to the disciple, after having studied the psychosomatic structure of the disciple, one deity to study, to fuse with, to concentrate on, and to harmonize with. This is why there are ways of being, rules concerning form deities, but no rules and no way of being and no form in the internal divinity, the formless divinity, where there is no man, no woman, no child, no single, no multiple. All is one. This is the formless deity, but few can concentrate on such an abstract and formless deity, which is why, for the ease of evolution, so that the steps of evolution can be taken faster, form deities have been given. After having covered those steps of evolution, one can move into formlessness and absolution. We will talk more about divinities and deities in the next class. Thank you for listening. Namaskar and goodbye.